Some secrets are buried so deep that even the dead whisper about them. Somewhere in the Carolina Lowcountry, beneath the moss-covered oaks and the quiet hum of cicadas, lies a truth that once shattered one of Charleston's proudest families. A truth born from desperation, deceit, and an unspeakable act hidden beneath the beauty of the Old South. Part 1: The beginning of the lie. The story begins along the Ashley River, where the air hung thick with heat and secrets. The Rutledge plantation stretched across 3,000 acres of rich Carolina soil, its white columned house rising proudly at the end of an oak-lined road. From the river's edge, the sound of cicadas blended with the distant cries of enslaved workers to form a haunting melody that echoed through the fields. In 1843, this grand estate belonged to Nathaniel Rutledge, a 37-year-old planter known for his charm, his wealth, and his reputation for progress. He called himself a modern man, the kind who read the latest agricultural journals and boasted of treating his slaves well. In truth, like every other man of his class, he measured human lives in labor and profit. Beside him stood his wife, Catherine Hammond Rutledge, a woman once admired for her beauty, her refinement, and her Savannah upbringing. Yet behind the polished manners and the expensive dresses, Catherine lived under a shadow, one that no wealth could erase. For 7 long years, she had failed to give her husband what society demanded most, a child. In the grand parlors of Charleston, whispers had begun to spread. People said the Rutledge's marriage was cursed. Others whispered that Catherine was being punished by God. The Hammonds, her family back in Savannah, had sent letters urging her to see doctors, to pray harder, to try new tonics. Catherine obeyed every command. She drank foul-smelling medicines of mercury and lead. She submitted to painful treatments that left her weak and trembling. Yet month after month, her womb remained silent. When the last physician, an arrogant man from Philadelphia, declared that her body would never bear life, Catherine felt the world close in around her. Without a child, she was nothing more than a failed wife, a beautiful ornament soon to be cast aside. Her husband's estate would one day pass not to her children, but to his brothers. And she knew Nathaniel would never accept that. That spring of 1844 brought unbearable heat to the Lowcountry. The days grew heavy, the air wet and sluggish. Catherine spent her afternoons on the upstairs veranda, overlooking the wide stretch of cotton fields and the shimmering bend of the Ashley River. She watched the people who worked her husband's land, men and women whose lives began and ended in those fields. Among them was a young woman who drew her attention again and again. Delilah, 22 years old, the daughter of a cooper and a woman long dead from fever. She had lived most of her life on the plantation, quiet and obedient, until 2 years earlier when she had been brought into the main house to serve as a lady's maid. Delilah was unlike most of the others. She was light-skinned, her features softened by generations of violence and forced mixture. She had an air of calm about her, a gentleness that made Catherine study her longer than she meant to. What Catherine noticed most, however, was how easily Delilah could pass, as if the right dress and the right room might make her look like one of Catherine's own kind. That summer, Catherine began to treat Delilah differently. She spoke to her softly, sometimes calling her into the parlor not to work, but to talk. She taught her to style her hair, to fold linens, to manage small household accounts. It was unusual behavior for a mistress, and the other servants whispered about it in the quarters at night. Delilah, meanwhile, felt an unease she couldn't name. Catherine's kindness carried weight, as if something unseen waited behind every question. Catherine began asking her about her health, whether she slept well, whether her cycles came regularly, whether she ever felt faint or ill. The questions grew personal, then invasive. But Delilah answered them all, her fear of defiance stronger than her discomfort. By midsummer, Catherine's plan had taken form. It was something that had come to her, she claimed later, in a vision, an answer from God himself. But deep down, she knew it was her own doing. She had found her solution to the problem that threatened to destroy her life and her marriage. A child would be born in the house on the Ashley River. A child with Nathaniel's blood, but not Catherine's. And no one would ever know. That night, as thunder rolled across the low country and lightning split the sky, Catherine stood at her window, looking toward the slave quarters. The rain fell in sheets, washing over the fields, and she whispered to herself, "No one will ever take my place." What began as a desperate thought would soon become one of the most horrifying deceptions in Carolina's history, one that would bind master and servant, mother and child, in a lie so deep it would take decades to unravel. To be continued in Part 2, The Deal in the Shadows. Call to action. If this mystery from the dark side of Southern history caught your attention, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Title: The Child of Shadows, Part 2, The Rutledge Plantation Mystery. Engaging hook. Some lies are born in candlelight and whispered through trembling lips. On the banks of the Ashley River, a desperate woman and her husband made a pact that would stain their souls forever. What began as a plan to save a family name would become one of the darkest secrets in the Carolina Lowcountry. Part 2: The Deal in the Shadows. Catherine Rutledge had decided that if God would not give her a child, she would take one. Her plan was simple in words but monstrous in deed. She would have her husband, Nathaniel, father a child with Delilah, the young enslaved woman who worked as her maid. When that child was born, Catherine would claim it as her own. It was not unheard of for slave women to bear the children of their masters. The fields and the quarters were filled with evidence of such sins. But Catherine's plan went far beyond the cruelty that people chose not to see. She wanted to take that child and raise it as white. She wanted Charleston society to believe it was the true heir to the Rutledge fortune. Catherine began preparing her stage with cold precision. She started to complain of mysterious, female ailments. She said her doctor had ordered her to rest away from noise and visitors. Then she had a small cottage built at the far edge of the plantation, a private place where, she claimed, she could recover. No one questioned her. A lady of her status could do as she pleased. Next, she dismissed the older house servants who had known her too long and replaced them with younger women who feared her enough to obey. Every detail was arranged, every word rehearsed. One humid night in August, Catherine finally told Nathaniel her plan. They sat in his study, the air thick with the scent of tobacco and lamp oil. Outside, crickets sang in the dark. Inside, Catherine's voice was calm, steady, and cold. She spoke of legacy and reputation. She painted a picture of the Rutledge name fading from the world, their fortune passing to his brother's children. She reminded him of what his father had built, of what he himself had added to the plantation. She spoke not of love or morality, but of duty and power. At first, Nathaniel recoiled in disgust. His wife was asking him to commit an unthinkable act, to take an enslaved woman, father a child, and pretend it was born of his own wife. But as the night went on, his disgust began to turn into curiosity, then into something else, practical calculation. Catherine's logic was flawless. If they could make the world believe the lie, then the problem of inheritance would be solved forever. By dawn, Nathaniel had agreed. He told himself it was for the sake of the family. But deep down, he knew he was driven by pride and fear. The very next week, Catherine announced her miracle. She told the household that the Philadelphia doctor's treatment had succeeded, that she was, at last, expecting. The news spread quickly, and soon congratulations poured in from Charleston. Catherine played the role perfectly. She sighed about morning sickness, refused visitors, and began wearing loose gowns that hinted at a swelling belly. In the meantime, Delilah's life changed completely. She was moved into a small room beside Catherine's suite. Catherine told her that she had been chosen for a sacred duty, that she would carry a child meant to bring joy to the mistress and honor to her family. Catherine promised her special treatment and comfort. But the promise was laced with threat. Delilah knew too well what refusal could mean. For 3 nights in September, Nathaniel went to Delilah's room. He did not speak more than a few words. He did not look her in the eyes. He performed the act with mechanical detachment, his face blank, his mind numb. Catherine waited in her own room, pacing, listening for footsteps in the hall. When it was done, Nathaniel avoided Delilah entirely, pretending she no longer existed. Weeks passed. The air cooled, then turned sharp with winter. Delilah's stomach began to swell. She was forbidden to leave her room. Only 2 young girls brought her food, girls too afraid to ask questions. To them, Delilah was simply sick. Meanwhile, Catherine performed her part with unsettling grace. She appeared in Charleston that December, dressed in silk, her padded belly prominent. She smiled through dinner conversations, accepting congratulations with a glow that almost looked genuine. She told the other ladies of her cravings, of the baby's kicking, of her gratitude to God. No one doubted her. When she returned to the plantation, she dismissed the winter visitors and spent her days preparing for confinement. Her secret world grew smaller. Only Nathaniel, Delilah, and a few enslaved servants knew the truth. By early spring, the plan was nearly complete. Catherine moved into the small cottage she had built for her supposed recovery. She brought Delilah with her, along with an old enslaved midwife named Patience, who had delivered dozens of children on the plantation. The cottage was isolated, surrounded by trees thick with moss. Heavy curtains blocked the windows. The air inside was heavy with the scent of herbs and damp wood. Catherine stayed in the parlor, pacing like a restless spirit, while Delilah labored in the next room. It was a Friday in late April when the storm rolled in. The sky turned black, and thunder shook the walls. Delilah's cries rose and fell with the rain, her pain drowned out by the storm outside. She called for her mother, for mercy, for it to end. Catherine sat nearby, trembling, not from fear, but from anticipation. After 14 hours, the cries stopped. Then came the sound of a baby's wail, thin, sharp, alive. Catherine pressed her hand to her mouth as Patience emerged, drenched in sweat, holding a newborn wrapped in linen. "It's a boy," she said. Catherine stepped forward, her face pale and glowing in the lantern light. She reached for the child with trembling hands. For a moment, Delilah tried to lift her head, whispering something too weak to hear. But Catherine didn't look at her. She pressed the baby to her chest and whispered, "My son." That night, the thunder rolled across the river, and the world outside the cottage slept. Inside, one woman wept in pain, another in triumph. And the lie that would destroy them all took its first breath. To be continued in Part 3, The Child Who Wasn't Hers. Call to action. If this story sent chills down your spine, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and hit the bell icon so you never miss our next episode. Tell us in the comments, what do you think Catherine will do next? Title: The Secret Heir, Part 3, The Rutledge Plantation Mystery. Engaging hook. The storm that brought William Rutledge into the world also carried a curse. Beneath thunder and rain, a terrible lie was born, a lie so perfect it fooled a plantation, a city, and even a mother's own heart. But lies have a way of whispering to those who were never meant to hear them. Part 3, The Boy Who Shouldn't Have Been. The night Delilah gave birth was filled with thunder. For 14 hours she cried out, her pain drowned by the storm raging over the Ashley River. Inside the candlelit cottage, Catherine Rutledge paced the floor like a restless spirit, waiting for the sound that would change her life. When it came, a baby's cry, sharp and alive, Catherine moved quickly. The midwife, old Patience, cleaned the child and wrapped him in linen. But before Delilah could even hold her son, Catherine took him. The young mother lay weak and trembling as the laudanum dulled her pain, her arms aching for a child she would never touch again. By dawn, Catherine carried the baby to the main house. Her face was pale but proud as she declared to the household that she had given birth to a healthy boy. Nathaniel was summoned. The servants were gathered to witness. And so, under the soft light of morning, William Nathaniel Rutledge was introduced to the world, heir to one of the grandest plantations in South Carolina. He was perfect for Catherine's purposes. His skin was pale, his features soft and innocent. To everyone who came to visit, he was simply the miracle child born to a once barren woman. Congratulations poured in from Charleston society. Catherine played her part with flawless grace, smiling through tears of joy, speaking of sleepless nights and blessed exhaustion. Meanwhile, Delilah recovered in silence. For 6 weeks, she lay in isolation, her body heavy with milk for a child she would never nurse. When she returned to the main house, it was not as the mother of the child she had born, but as his wet nurse. She was allowed to feed him, to hold him close for moments at a time, but only under Catherine's watchful eye. That small comfort was soon taken away. Catherine began to fear that Delilah might grow attached to the child, that some spark of recognition might pass between them. After 3 months, she dismissed Delilah from the nursery. A new wet nurse was brought from another plantation, a stranger with no connection to the secret. Delilah was sent to the fields, where she worked beneath the sun, her hands blistering, her heart broken. Years passed. The deception held. Catherine became the picture of a devoted mother, elegant, proud, respected. She managed William's upbringing with meticulous care, ensuring he received the best education, the finest clothes, and the discipline expected of a young Southern gentleman. Nathaniel, too, buried his guilt deep beneath routine. He treated the boy with genuine affection, teaching him to ride horses, hunt, and manage the estate. If he ever thought of Delilah, he never said so. But in the quarters, the truth was not forgotten. The enslaved people whispered the story in secret, passing it down like forbidden scripture. They watched as Delilah bent over cotton rows, her face expressionless, her body thin from work and grief. Her father, Isaac the cooper, grew older and more silent, his anger smoldering just beneath the surface. William, meanwhile, grew into a bright and handsome boy. His skin stayed fair, his hair a light brown that gleamed gold in sunlight. Catherine studied him constantly for signs of mixed heritage, any feature that might betray the truth. But none came. To society, he was every inch a Rutledge. Yet shadows always have a way of finding cracks in the light. By 1856, William was 11 years old, curious, confident, and restless. He had a habit of exploring the plantation before his tutors arrived each morning. On one such morning, he followed the sound of hammering to Isaac's workshop. The old man was shaping staves for barrels, his strong hands steady despite the years. William liked to watch him work. Isaac was patient and precise, his tools an extension of his will. But that morning, something in Isaac's eyes seemed different, distant and sad. "Do you have children, Isaac?" William asked without thinking, his young voice light, unaware of the pain such a question could cause. Isaac paused, the hammer frozen mid-swing. "Had a daughter," he said quietly after a long moment. "Still do, I suppose. Works the lower fields now." William frowned. "Why doesn't she work in the house? My mother says the house servants have easier lives." Isaac's jaw tightened. "Your mother has her reasons for everything she does, Master William." There was something strange in his tone, a shadow William couldn't name. The boy left soon after, but the words followed him, haunting his thoughts like a whisper he couldn't quite hear. 2 weeks later, another secret revealed itself. Catherine had gone to visit neighbors, leaving her private sitting room unattended. William, bored and curious, wandered inside. He knew she kept a journal locked in her desk, a book she guarded like treasure. The lock was simple. Within minutes, the drawer was open, and the journal lay in his hands. Most of it was dull, lists, complaints, dinner notes. But then, deeper in the pages, he found older entries, written before his birth. He read about his mother's despair at being childless, about treatments that failed, about prayers unanswered. And then he saw the line that froze his blood. "I have conceived a solution to our desperate situation. It is bold beyond anything I might have imagined myself capable of, and it requires Nathaniel's cooperation in an act society would condemn. But what choice do we have? I have identified a suitable candidate among the house servants, young, healthy, light enough that the results should pass scrutiny. If Nathaniel agrees, we could have our heir within the year, and no one need ever know the circumstances of the child's origin." William's hands trembled. He turned the page, but the next few entries had been torn out. When the writing resumed, it simply read, "William Nathaniel Rutledge was born today, the answer to all our prayers." He sat frozen, the journal open on his knees. The words blurred, his breath shallow. Something inside him shifted, something he couldn't yet name but would never forget. He put the journal back exactly as he found it and walked outside. The air was heavy and hot, yet he felt cold. The world looked the same, but nothing was the same. For days he said nothing. He went through his lessons and meals in silence, his mind replaying his mother's words again and again. Catherine noticed his quietness, but assumed it was the heat. Nathaniel didn't notice at all. But William was. beginning to see things differently. His mother's smiles now seemed forced. His father's pride looked rehearsed. And when he passed the fields, he found his eyes drawn to the workers, to the faces of women who looked vaguely familiar in ways he couldn't explain. He began to wonder who his mother's suitable candidate had been. And deep inside, though he couldn't say why, he felt certain the answer was somewhere out there in those fields, among the very people he had been taught were less than human. That summer, the walls of the Rutledge plantation began to whisper again. To be continued in Part 4, The Truth Beneath the Fields. Call to action. If this story gave you chills, hit subscribe and tap the bell icon for Part 4. Comment below, do you think William will uncover the truth about his birth? Hook. There are secrets that sleep for years beneath the quiet hum of summer, hidden in the dust of old ledgers and the hush of obedient voices. But sometimes, when the right question is asked, they wake up. And when they do, they don't return to silence easily. Part 4. The Awakening. William couldn't stop thinking about the woman in the fields, the one Isaac had mentioned. Had a daughter, he'd said. The words echoed in the boy's mind like a riddle he couldn't solve. Every afternoon, after his lessons, William would walk near the cotton rows under the pretense of curiosity about plantation work. In truth, he was searching. He found her one sweltering July day. She stood apart from the other workers, her back straight despite the heat, her head covered by a faded scarf. She moved with a kind of grace that didn't belong among the bent figures around her. When she turned briefly toward him, William froze. There was something hauntingly familiar about her face, something in the curve of her cheek, the angle of her chin. It was like seeing a reflection of himself in the wrong mirror. He didn't speak to her. He couldn't. But from that moment, the question that had begun as curiosity became an obsession. Who was she, and why did his mother's journal seem to whisper her name without saying it? That evening, at dinner, William tried to study Catherine without appearing to. His mother was radiant as always, her posture perfect, her hands moving delicately as she cut her food. To anyone else, she looked like the picture of grace. But William saw something else now, a tension that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface, as if she was holding her entire world together through sheer force of will. "Mother," he said suddenly, "who works in the lower fields?" Catherine looked up, surprised. "Why do you ask? I saw a woman there today," he said carefully. "She looks different from the others." Her knife froze for half a second before continuing. "There are hundreds of workers, William. You mustn't concern yourself with them." "She looked at me," he insisted. "Like she knew me." Catherine's tone sharpened. "That's enough. You are never to wander near the lower fields again. Do you understand?" He nodded, but something in her eyes, fear, not anger, confirmed what he had already begun to suspect. That night, Catherine sat alone in her sitting room long after the lamps had burned low. The memory of that night 12 years ago still haunted her. The thunder, the cries from the cottage, the moment she first held the child that was not hers. She had built an entire life upon that night. She had convinced herself it was providence, not theft. But hearing William mention the woman broke something inside her calm. She realized the truth was stirring again, threatening to undo everything she had built. Down in the quarters, Delilah lay awake, her body aching from the day's labor. She had seen the boy. Her boy. He had walked past her like a young master, the sun glinting off his hair, the same color hers had been when she was young. She had trained herself not to look at him over the years, not to think of him, but time had eroded that discipline. Seeing him up close had reopened every wound. She whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for him. "Lord, let him never know," she murmured. "Let him never carry what I carry." But God, it seemed, was not in the business of protecting secrets anymore. The next morning, William returned to the cooper's shop. Isaac was there, working as always, his hammer falling in steady rhythm. "Isaac," William said quietly, "was your daughter's name Delilah?" The old man's hands froze. His eyes lifted slowly to meet William's. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Isaac said, in a voice that trembled only slightly, "You ask too many questions, Master William." "I found something in my mother's journal," William pressed. She wrote about a servant who helped her have a child. Isaac's face went pale. You shouldn't speak of such things. Why not? William demanded. If it's not true, say so. Isaac turned away, gripping the edge of the workbench. Some truths don't belong to you, boy. Leave them buried. But William couldn't. He was no longer the innocent child who believed everything he was told. He needed answers. That evening, while the house slept, he crept back to his mother's desk. He searched through the locked drawer again, hoping to find something more, letters, notes, anything. Instead, he found a folded piece of parchment hidden beneath a false bottom. It was a birth certificate. His own, but the midwife's signature was smudged, and the date of birth didn't match the one he'd celebrated every year. His birthday, it turned out, had been altered. His hands shook as he realized what that meant. Someone had rewritten his beginning. At dawn, he rode his pony down toward the river, his mind spinning. The air was thick with mist and the smell of salt marsh. He stopped near the old cottage, the one his mother never spoke of, the one that looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. The windows were boarded, but the door hung slightly open. Inside, the air was still and heavy, as if time itself had stopped. A rusted cradle sat in the corner. He stared at it for a long time, understanding in a way that made him sick. Behind him, a voice said quietly, "You shouldn't be here." It was Delilah. William turned, his heart pounding. Up close, he saw the truth in her eyes, the same greenish flecks as his own, the same tilt to the brow. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she said softly, "You look just like your father." He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Delilah lowered her eyes. "Go back to that big house, child. Go back before she finds out you came here." "Who are you?" he whispered, though he already knew. She looked at him then, tears glinting in her eyes. "The one who gave you life." The world seemed to tilt. William stumbled back, shaking his head, unable to process what he'd just heard. Delilah turned away, her shoulders trembling. "You shouldn't hate her," she said softly. She did what she thought she had to. But hatred was already blooming in William's chest, not for her, but for the lie he'd been forced to live. From the veranda of the main house, Catherine watched through her spyglass, her breath catching when she saw her son near the cottage. She knew, even from that distance, what must have happened. The past had finally spoken. If you're drawn into this unraveling web of deceit, betrayal, and buried bloodlines, make sure to like, share, and comment where you're watching from. And don't miss the next part of the Rutledge secret, where William's discovery sets off a chain of events that no one, especially Catherine, can control. Hook. Some secrets, once spoken, refuse to stay buried. They creep through walls, ride the wind, and twist the hearts of those who tried to silence them. On the banks of the Ashley River, the lie that had sustained the Rutledge family for 12 long years was about to come undone. Part 5. The Unraveling. William could not sleep that night. The words echoed in his mind, soft but merciless, "The one who gave you life." He had replayed every moment with Delilah, her trembling voice, her eyes full of pain, the resemblance he could no longer deny. It all fit too perfectly. His mother's journal, the hidden birth record, the way Catherine had silenced any talk of the lower fields, it all led to one truth. He was not Catherine's son. He was hers. When dawn came, William felt older, harder. Something inside him had shifted forever. He looked at his reflection in the mirror and saw a stranger staring back, a boy who no longer belonged in that grand white house. At breakfast, Catherine noticed his silence. "You're pale," she said gently. "Are you feeling unwell?" "I'm fine," William replied, his voice flat. But he couldn't stop himself. "Mother," he said suddenly, "why do you never talk about the year I was born?" Catherine froze, her hand hovering over her teacup. "What do you mean? You have journals from every year except that one," he continued. "And there's a cottage near the river you never let anyone go near." "Why?" For a heartbeat, her eyes betrayed panic, then quickly hardened. "You've been reading things that are not meant for you." William met her gaze. "You lied to me." Catherine rose from the table so abruptly that her chair scraped the floor. "You will not speak to me in that tone. Do you understand?" But he didn't back down. Who is Delilah? The sound of her name was like a blow. Catherine's hand trembled. You've been near her. Yes, William said quietly. She told me the truth. Catherine's face went pale. For the first time, William saw fear, not the polished composure of a lady, but raw fear. She sank back into her chair, her breath coming fast. Oh, God, she whispered. You weren't supposed to know. Then why did you steal me? He asked, his voice breaking. Why did you take me from her? Catherine pressed her hands to her temples. You don't understand. I had no choice. I couldn't lose everything. You were meant to be mine. I gave you a life she never could. William stared at her, disgusted. You gave me a lie. Before she could answer, he stormed out, leaving her trembling in silence. That afternoon, a storm rolled in from the coast, thunder rumbling across the marshes. Catherine paced the veranda, watching for any sign of her son. When Nathaniel returned from Charleston that evening, he found her pale and shaken. What happened? He demanded. William knows, she whispered. Nathaniel went still. Knows what? The truth, she said. About Delilah. About the child. For a long moment, Nathaniel said nothing. Then he poured himself a drink, his movements slow, deliberate. Then we'll fix it, he said finally. We'll send the woman away. Sell her, if we must. Catherine looked at him in horror. You can't. She's his mother. Nathaniel's eyes were cold. She's property, Catherine, and she's become dangerous. That night, a rider was sent from the plantation with a sealed letter for a slave broker in Savannah. Catherine watched from her window as the horse disappeared into the darkness, her heart breaking with every hoofbeat. Meanwhile, William returned to the riverside cottage where he'd first met Delilah. He found her sitting outside, staring at the lightning flickering across the sky. They're going to sell you, he said. Delilah nodded slowly. I knew this day would come. I won't let them, William said fiercely. I'll tell father everything. I'll tell the world if I have to. She looked at him with sad tenderness. Child, you think truth can save me? It can't. The truth is a weapon only when someone's willing to believe it. William clenched his fists. Then I'll make them believe it. Delilah reached out and touched his hand. Don't destroy yourself trying to fix what they broke. You were born into their world. I was born into mine. No truth can change that. Tears stung William's eyes. You're my mother. Delilah smiled faintly. And you're my heart walking outside my body. But you must live, even if I don't. A sound came from the trees, hooves, voices, the glow of lanterns. Delilah's face hardened. Go, she whispered. Go now. William hesitated. No, I'm not leaving you. Delilah pushed him toward the shadows. Run, William, please. If they find you here, they'll know everything. He turned and ran, heart pounding, as men on horseback approached the cottage. He hid behind a fallen oak and watched as overseers dismounted, entering the cabin. Moments later, they dragged Delilah out. She didn't resist. She only looked once toward the darkness where she knew her son was hiding. Mr. Rutledge's orders, one of them said gruffly. She's to be taken to Charleston first light. William bit his lip to keep from crying out. He watched as they tied her hands and led her away into the night. When he returned to the house, soaked and shaking, Catherine was waiting. Her face was pale and her eyes red from crying. You saw, she whispered. They're selling her, William said bitterly. You're letting them. I'm protecting you, she said. If word spreads, if people find out, everything we've built will be destroyed. I don't care about your reputation. He shouted. She's my mother. Catherine stepped forward, her voice trembling. No, William, I am your mother. I raised you, I loved you, I kept you safe. William looked at her for a long time. Then, in a low, broken voice, he said, You stole me. Catherine flinched as if he'd struck her. He turned and left, leaving her alone with the storm still raging outside. In the darkness beyond the veranda, lightning split the sky, illuminating the oak-lined drive and the distant glow of the overseers' lanterns. The lie that had held the Rutledge family together was unraveling, thread by thread. But the worst was yet to come. Because secrets like these never die quietly, they burn everything before they're buried. If this story has gripped your heart, don't forget to like, share, and tell us what state you're watching from. Join us next time for part 6 of The Rutledge Secret, when the truth travels from the Ashley River to the streets of Charleston, and the ghosts of betrayal begin to whisper louder than ever. Title: The Rutledge Secret, Part 6, The Birth in the Shadows. Hook. Sometimes evil wears lace gloves and whispers prayers before committing its sins. On a stormy night in 1845, the grand Rutledge house stood silent, except for the sound of a single woman's scream, muffled behind closed doors. What happened that night would forever stain the family's legacy, even if no one dared to speak of it aloud. Part 6. The Birth in the Shadows. The summer storms came early that year, flooding the rice fields and washing away entire rows of cotton. But inside the Rutledge mansion, something even darker was growing. Catherine's plan had entered its final stage, and every servant in the house could feel it. The tension, the fear, the strange orders whispered through clenched teeth. Delilah had been confined to the upstairs chambers for weeks. The windows were shuttered, the curtains drawn tight. Catherine had dismissed nearly all the house servants except for one older woman, Martha, who had been with the Rutledge family for more than 30 years. Martha was loyal, but she wasn't blind. She had watched Delilah's body change, her belly swell, her face pale. And she knew that whatever Catherine was planning, it wasn't natural. At night, Delilah wept quietly into her pillow. She had begged Catherine to let her rest, to let her see her father, but Catherine would only smile and say, "You're doing God's work, child. The Lord rewards obedience." The night the baby came, thunder shook the walls of the house. Nathaniel was in Charleston on business, or so Catherine had arranged it. She told the remaining servants that she was unwell and must not be disturbed. Only Martha and one young kitchen girl were called upstairs. The labor lasted 12 long hours. Delilah cried out again and again, her voice hoarse with pain. Catherine stood beside her, pale but determined, giving orders in a voice that trembled only once. The sheets were soaked in blood and sweat. Finally, as dawn broke through the heavy curtains, the child's first cry filled the room, a boy, healthy and strong. For a long moment, Catherine just stared at him. Her eyes filled with something that looked like awe, or madness. Then she reached out her trembling hands and said, "Bring him to me." Delilah hesitated, clutching the baby to her chest. "Please, ma'am," she whispered, her voice weak. "He's mine." Catherine's voice turned cold. "No, Delilah, he belongs to God, and to me." What happened next was never written down, but Martha later told a preacher on her deathbed what she saw. Catherine took the baby, wrapped him in fine linen, and pressed him against her heart as if she could make him part of her own flesh. She sent the kitchen girl away and ordered Martha to burn the bloody sheets and bury the evidence near the smokehouse. Delilah lay silent, tears sliding down her face as she stared at the ceiling. Catherine leaned close and whispered, "Rest now, my dear. You've done your duty." Then she ordered laudanum to keep Delilah quiet for days. When Nathaniel returned 2 weeks later, he was greeted by the sound of an infant crying. Catherine met him at the top of the stairs, her hair loose, her eyes hollow but glowing with false joy. "Nathaniel," she said softly, "the Lord has blessed us. A miracle. I gave birth while you were away." Nathaniel froze. "That's impossible," he said. "The doctors." But Catherine pressed the baby into his arms, her voice breaking. "God has shamed the doctors. Look at him, Nathaniel. Look at our son." He hesitated, staring at the child's face, light-skinned, delicate, his eyes bright and searching. The resemblance to Delilah was faint but not invisible. For a moment, Nathaniel's brow furrowed. Then Catherine began to weep. "Do you doubt me? Do you doubt a mother's pain?" Her tears, her trembling, her supposed suffering, all of it broke through Nathaniel's doubt. He pulled her close, murmuring apologies, calling the child their miracle. Catherine smiled through her tears, her arms tightening around both of them. From that day forward, no one spoke of the truth again. The baby was named Samuel Rutledge and registered in the family Bible as the only heir. Delilah was moved to a small cabin on the edge of the property, kept under watch. She was forbidden to come near the main house. But at night, when the wind carried across the fields, some said you could hear a woman's song, soft and sad, coming from the slave quarters. A lullaby song for a child she could never hold again. And though Catherine believed her secret buried, shadows have long memories. And on the Rutledge plantation, secrets never stayed silent for long. To be continued. If you'd like me to continue with part 7 about Samuel's strange behavior as he grows up and whispers of ghosts in the nursery, I can write it next in the same eerie, cinematic tone for your YouTube horror series. Would you like me to do that? Title: The Rutledge Secret, Part 7, The Child Who Heard Whispers. Hook. Some say that children can sense what adults choose to ignore. In the grand Rutledge mansion, laughter never lasted long, and every shadow seemed to whisper a name no one dared to speak aloud. The child born in secrecy began to ask questions no one could answer, and the house that was built on lies began to breathe those lies back into life. Part 7. The Child Who Heard Whispers. By the spring of 1847, little Samuel Rutledge had become the center of the household. His blonde curls and light skin made him the pride of his mother, though the servants whispered that his eyes, dark and knowing, belonged to another world. Catherine doted on him endlessly, dressing him in fine linen and teaching him scripture before he could even spell his name. She called him her miracle, her gift from heaven, and in front of guests, no one dared question her joy. But when night came, and the house grew quiet, strange things began to happen in Samuel's nursery. His cradle would rock by itself. Toys would move from one side of the room to the other. Once, Martha, the old servant who had witnessed his birth, swore she heard a lullaby being sung softly when no one else was there. It was a song no white lady would know, low, rhythmic, and filled with sorrow. Samuel began to wake screaming in the night. "Mama," he'd cry, pointing toward the corner. "She's here again." Catherine would rush to him, holding him tight. "Who, my love, who's here?" "The lady," he'd whisper. "She cries." At first, Catherine brushed it off as childish imagination, but soon even she began to feel something watching. Doors creaked when no one walked the halls. The faint smell of burning candles and river mud clung to the nursery even when the windows were open. Once, Catherine found Samuel standing by the window, staring toward the distant slave cabins, humming that same sorrowful tune she had forbidden anyone to sing. When she asked where he learned it, Samuel only said, "The lady taught me." Catherine's composure began to crack. She ordered the nursery moved to the east wing, away from the quarters, away from the river. She replaced the servants who attended him and burned his old toys in the garden. Yet nothing changed. The child continued to whisper to unseen figures and sometimes woke with muddy footprints on the hem of his nightshirt. One evening, Catherine found him drawing on the floorboards with a bit of chalk. He had sketched a woman, a dark figure with long hair and sad eyes. "Who is that?" she demanded. Samuel looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "That's the lady who sings to me. She says she's my real mama." Catherine slapped the chalk from his hand so hard that he began to cry. She gathered him up, rocking him back and forth, whispering, "No, no, my darling. I'm your mother, only me." But deep down, she felt her heart tremble. That night, Catherine locked herself in her room and opened the drawer where she kept Delilah's letters she had ordered destroyed but secretly kept. Each letter was written in delicate, careful script, full of longing for the child she had been forced to give up. "If you have any mercy," one line read, "let me see him, if only once." Catherine tore the letters to pieces, tossed them into the fire, and watched the flames curl around the paper. But as the fire burned low, she could have sworn she saw words forming in the smoke, "He knows." The next morning, the house was restless. Martha found a child's footprints leading down the back stairs to the garden. Samuel had wandered outside during the night, barefoot. When they found him near the old oak tree, he was holding a single white ribbon, Delilah's ribbon, one that had been buried with her after she'd died of fever months earlier. Catherine fainted at the sight. She was carried inside, murmuring words no one understood. After that day, she refused to let Samuel out of her sight. She prayed over him every morning, sprinkled holy water around his room, and demanded that a priest bless the house. But even the priest felt uneasy inside those walls. "There is sorrow here," he said quietly. "Sorrow that won't rest." Samuel grew quieter as summer came. He stopped playing with his toys and spent hours staring at the river. When Catherine asked him what he saw, he replied, "The lady says she's waiting for me." Catherine's hands trembled. "You mustn't listen to her," she said. "She's not real." Samuel only smiled. "She says you know she's real." That night, a storm rolled over the Ashley River. The thunder cracked, lightning flashed across the fields, and somewhere in the house, a woman's voice sang that same haunting lullaby. Catherine rushed into the nursery and found the window open, the curtains blowing wildly in the wind. Samuel was gone. She screamed for the servants, and they searched the grounds for hours. Finally, they found him standing by the riverbank, unharmed but pale as moonlight. He looked up at his mother and said, "She told me not to be afraid." Catherine clutched him to her chest, sobbing in relief, but when she looked up, she saw something that froze her blood. In the shallow water near the reeds, a figure stood, tall, silent, and familiar. The rain washed through her hair, and her eyes seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. It was Delilah. When Catherine blinked, the figure was gone. That night, she could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Delilah's face. Every whisper of the wind sounded like that lullaby. She realized then that no secret, no matter how carefully buried, stays hidden forever. And somewhere beyond the walls of the great Rutledge house, the past was stirring. To be continued. Would you like me to continue with Part 8, where Catherine's guilt begins to destroy her mind and the plantation workers start seeing Delilah's ghost near the cotton fields? Title: The Rutledge Secret, Part 8, The Haunting of the Fields. Hook. The Rutledge plantation once shone like a pearl beside the river. But after sunset, that same river shimmered red in the moonlight, and no one dared to work the fields alone. They said the mistress had angered a spirit, and that spirit had begun to walk again. Part 8. The Haunting of the Fields. After the night Samuel was found by the river, the household changed. The laughter that once echoed in the halls vanished. Doors slammed without wind. Mirrors cracked on their own. The air inside the grand house grew thick and heavy, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. The slaves spoke of seeing a woman walking between the rows of cotton at dawn. She wore a white gown soaked with river water, and her eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Some said it was Delilah. Others said it was her restless spirit, searching for the child taken from her. Catherine heard the whispers, but she pretended not to. She dismissed the frightened servants, replacing them with new ones who didn't yet know the story. But fear has a way of spreading faster than fire. Within days, even the new workers began to refuse the night shifts. They claimed they heard singing near the fields, a lullaby no white woman would know. At first, Catherine tried to explain it away. "It's nonsense," she told Nathaniel, though her own hands trembled when she said it. "They're superstitious. They always are." Nathaniel didn't respond. He had grown quiet these days, his once proud face lined with exhaustion. The guilt that Catherine had learned to hide so well was slowly eating him alive. Every creak of the house made him flinch. Every whisper of wind made him turn toward the door, expecting something, or someone, to appear. One afternoon, as the summer heat pressed down like a weight, Nathaniel walked out to the fields. The workers froze when they saw him coming. He ignored their stares and kept walking until he reached the spot where Delilah's cabin once stood. Only the chimney remained, blackened and half collapsed. He stood there for a long time. Then, faintly, he heard humming. It came from nowhere and everywhere, drifting through the air like smoke. It was that same lullaby, the one Samuel had been singing in his sleep. Nathaniel turned pale. He stumbled back toward the house, his boots sinking into the mud. That night, he locked himself in his study and poured whiskey until the glass slipped from his hand. He told Catherine they needed to leave the plantation, that something unholy had taken root there. But Catherine refused. "This house is our legacy," she said, her eyes fierce. "We built it with our own hands, and no ghost will drive us out." Her voice was strong, but her spirit was breaking. She had begun to hear things too. Soft footsteps outside her door. Whispers calling her name from the nursery. Sometimes she would wake to find Samuel standing beside her bed, staring blankly into the darkness. One night, Catherine followed him. The moon hung low, painting the hallways silver. She watched as her son walked barefoot through the corridor, humming that cursed tune. He moved toward the back staircase and out into the yard. "Samuel," she whispered, but he didn't stop. He kept walking toward the cotton fields. The stalks swayed though there was no wind. Catherine followed, her heart pounding, her nightgown dragging through the dirt. At the edge of the field, she saw her. Delilah stood there, her skin pale as moonlight, her hair dripping water though the night was dry. In her arms, she held something, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Her eyes met Catherine's, and in that moment, the air grew colder. Catherine couldn't move. She felt her knees weaken, her throat tighten. Delilah stepped forward, her bare feet not making a sound on the soil. "You took what was mine," the spirit whispered. Her voice was both gentle and terrible. "Now you will know what it means to lose." Catherine screamed, but no sound came out. Delilah reached out her hand, and Samuel began to walk toward her. "No," Catherine lunged, grabbing her son, pulling him back with all her strength. The apparition faded into mist, leaving behind the faint smell of river water and roses. Samuel collapsed into her arms, trembling. When Catherine brought him inside, he wouldn't speak. For days, he refused to eat or play. He just sat by the window, watching the fields. Nathaniel tried to comfort him, but Samuel only said one thing: "She wants to come home." Catherine began to fear her own reflection. Sometimes, when she looked in the mirror, she thought she saw Delilah's face behind her shoulder. She stopped sleeping altogether, haunted by the sound of crying that echoed through the halls. One evening, Martha, the old servant, came to her door trembling. "Ma'am," she whispered, "the men found something down by the river." Catherine followed her outside. The night was thick with fog. Near the water's edge, the workers had gathered around a shallow pit. Inside it was a small bundle, an old piece of linen tied with twine. Catherine's heart stopped. She knew what it was before anyone spoke. It was the blanket from the night of the birth, the same one she had ordered burned years ago. Catherine dropped to her knees. The river shimmered beside her, black and endless. She could hear the faint sound of a lullaby again, this time clearer than ever, coming from the mist. Martha whispered a prayer, but the sound only made the air colder. Catherine looked into the fog and saw two shadows, one tall, one small, standing together at the river's edge. "Delilah," Catherine whispered, "please, stop." The shadows didn't move. That night, thunder rolled again over the Ashley River, just as it had on the night Samuel was born. The storm tore branches from the trees, lightning flashing across the sky. Inside the house, Samuel began to cry, his voice echoing through the halls. When Catherine ran to him, he was standing by the window again, pointing toward the fields. "She's coming," he said softly. "She says it's time." Catherine pulled him close, her heart pounding. Outside, the wind screamed like 1,000 voices. And for the first time since that secret night years ago, Catherine felt true fear, not of discovery but of justice. The past was no longer haunting her dreams. It was walking toward her in the storm. To be continued. Would you like me to continue with Part 9, where the haunting becomes violent and Catherine's secret finally begins to unravel before the entire plantation? Title: The Rutledge Secret, Part 9, The Storm and the Truth. Hook. The storm that night wasn't just thunder and rain, it was the past coming home. When lightning flashed across the plantation, it didn't just light the sky. It revealed the truth Catherine had buried 12 years ago. And this time, no lie could cover it. Part 9, The Storm and the Truth. The storm began before dusk, a restless growl that shook the old oaks around the Rutledge plantation. The sky turned a strange green, and the air smelled of iron and river water. Catherine stood at the window of her bedroom, watching the dark clouds twist like something alive. In her reflection, she thought she saw another face behind her, pale, silent, watching. She blinked, but the face was gone. Downstairs, Nathaniel shouted orders to the servants, telling them to secure the shutters and bring the animals in. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder so loud it rattled the mirrors. The entire house seemed to breathe in and hold its breath. Catherine turned when Samuel entered the room. His eyes were distant, almost glassy. He looked pale, as if he hadn't slept in days. She's here, he said softly. Who, darling? Catherine forced her voice to sound calm. The woman from the fields, he whispered. She came to me again. She said tonight everything would be made right. Before Catherine could answer, the wind howled against the walls like a living thing. The door to the hallway burst open, slamming hard enough to crack the frame. The candlelight flickered out, plunging the room into darkness. Downstairs, one of the servants screamed. Then came the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. Catherine grabbed Samuel's hand and led him into the corridor. The storm had cut off all light except the flashes of lightning that strobed through the windows. Every time the light flickered, she saw shadows moving, figures that weren't really there. They reached the staircase. Nathaniel stood below, his face pale and drawn. Catherine, he shouted above the thunder, the workers, something's happening in the fields. What do you mean? She cried back. They say they see her. He said. They say Delilah's ghost is walking by the river. Before Catherine could reply, lightning struck so close that the entire plantation house shook. Samuel screamed, covering his ears. The thunder that followed felt like it tore through the ground itself. And then the sound came, soft, clear, and terrible. It was the lullaby, the same song Catherine had heard in her nightmares. The same song Samuel hummed in his sleep. It floated through the rain, gentle and sorrowful, like a mother singing to her child. Catherine froze. It's not real, she whispered. It's the wind, it's just the wind. But Nathaniel's face said he knew better. He took the lantern from the table and stepped toward the door. I have to see, he said. Nathaniel, no, Catherine shouted, but he was already gone, his boots splashing through the flooded yard. Samuel tried to follow, but Catherine held him back. The boy struggled in her arms, shouting, she's calling for him. She wants him to come to the river. Catherine dragged him upstairs, into her bedroom, slamming the door behind them. Rain lashed against the windows. The wind screamed through the cracks. She tried to light a candle, but her hands shook too much to hold the match. From outside came a sound, a low moan, then the sharp crack of a tree falling. Then she heard Nathaniel's voice shouting her name. Catherine. She rushed to the window. Lightning flashed again, and for a split second, she saw them. Nathaniel stood by the riverbank, his lantern flickering wildly. And across from him, half hidden in the mist, stood a woman in white, her hair floating like dark smoke. Delilah. Catherine gasped and stumbled back from the window. No, she whispered. No, it's not possible. But when she turned around, Samuel was no longer in the room. Samuel, she cried. She ran into the hall, calling his name. The wind tore through the open windows, scattering papers and curtains. Her bare feet slapped against the wet floor as she ran downstairs. The front door was wide open, rain blowing in from outside. She saw small footprints in the mud, leading toward the river. She followed them. The rain soaked her nightgown as she ran, the ground turning to slippery clay beneath her feet. The thunder rolled again, shaking the trees. By the time she reached the riverbank, Nathaniel was on his knees. His lantern lay in the mud beside him, its light flickering. Samuel stood a few feet away, staring into the water. Samuel, Catherine cried, rushing forward. He turned to look at her, his eyes wide. She says you took everything from her, he said softly. She says now it's her turn. Catherine's heart stopped. Don't listen to her. She's lying. But as she spoke, the water rippled, and Delilah rose from the river, her gown trailing behind her like smoke. Her face was calm now, almost sad. Catherine, she said, her voice echoing with the sound of rushing water. You took my child. You took my life. I only came to take back what is mine. Nathaniel cried out, his voice breaking. Delilah, please, don't do this. Delilah looked at him, and for a moment, her expression softened. Then her eyes turned toward Catherine again, burning with sorrow and fury. The wind howled louder. The river surged higher, swallowing the ground at their feet. Catherine grabbed Samuel and pulled him close, screaming over the storm. He's my son. Delilah's eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. He was never yours. The next flash of lightning was blinding. For an instant, everything turned white. Then came silence. When the light faded, Delilah was gone. Nathaniel was lying motionless in the mud, his hand reaching toward the river. Catherine clutched Samuel, sobbing, her heart pounding like it would burst. The storm passed before dawn. By the time the sun rose, the plantation was a wreck, trees torn up, roofs caved in, the fields half flooded. Nathaniel's body was found near the riverbank. The official story was that he drowned trying to rescue a servant during the storm. But those who lived on the plantation whispered a different tale. They said the river had finally claimed what was owed. They said Delilah's spirit had taken her revenge. Catherine locked herself in her room for days after the funeral. She didn't eat. She barely spoke. Samuel stayed close by her side, silent and pale. And then, one night, the lullaby returned. It came softly through the open window, floating in with the breeze. Catherine rose from her bed, trembling. Samuel was standing by the window again. He turned to her and smiled faintly. "Mother," he said, "she says it's almost over." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. "Almost over," she whispered. He nodded. "She says she'll see you soon." The wind blew through the room again, carrying with it the faint scent of river water and roses. Catherine sank to her knees, knowing at last that the storm wasn't finished. It had only just begun. To be continued. Would you like me to continue with part 10, the final part where the curse finally ends and the terrifying truth of the Rutledge family is revealed before the entire town of Charleston? Title: The Rutledge Secret, Part 10, The Reckoning. Hook. The storm had passed, but the shadow it left behind would not fade. The truth of the Rutledge plantation was about to be revealed, shaking Charleston to its core. The lies that had lasted 12 years were unraveling, and no one, mother, father, or child, could hide from the consequences any longer. Part 10. The Reckoning. The morning after the storm, the Rutledge plantation was eerily silent. Broken branches littered the drive, and the river had spilled into the low fields, leaving a thick, muddy sheen over the cotton rows. Birds were unusually quiet, and the air carried the smell of wet earth and salt from the tide. Catherine sat in her parlor, hands clasped tightly in her lap, staring at the fireplace as if it could swallow her whole. Samuel, pale and silent, sat beside her. The house had survived the storm, but something fundamental had shifted. Catherine could feel it in every bone. Nathaniel's death had been a shock, but what truly terrified her was the return of the lullaby. Late last night, as the wind wound through the shattered windows, the sound had come again, soft and sorrowful. It was a voice that belonged to no living woman, yet one that carried a memory she could not escape. Samuel finally spoke. "Mother, she wants you to tell the truth." Catherine's hands shook. "No one can know, no one can ever know. If the city finds out," her voice trailed off, swallowed by fear. But William, now 12, had already begun piecing together fragments of the past. The journal in his hands, the hints in the servants' faces, the memory of the old cooper by the river, everything pointed to a single, undeniable truth. And now, with Nathaniel gone, the weight of secrecy rested entirely on Catherine's shoulders. By mid-morning, a small group had gathered outside the main house, the surviving house servants, some field hands who had managed to avoid the worst of the storm, and a few neighbors who had come to check on the plantation. They were anxious, their eyes flicking toward the front doors, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Catherine stepped onto the veranda, Samuel at her side, and addressed the assembled crowd. Her voice was thin, almost a whisper at first, but it grew stronger with each word. "I have something to tell you," she began. "Something that has been hidden for too long." She took a deep breath and began recounting the events of 12 years past. The treatments, the desperation, the unbearable pressure to produce an heir. Her confession was precise and measured, though her voice wavered with emotion. She described Delilah, the child, the deception, and the years of careful concealment. Gasps swept through the crowd. Eyes widened. Whispers broke out like sparks in dry grass. The reality of Catherine's actions, horrific yet astonishingly calculated, sank into the minds of all who heard. And then she turned to William. Her voice faltered. "The child you believed was mine, the child you are, the son of Delilah." For a long moment, William said nothing. The wind tugged at his hair, and he stared at the ground, trying to process the weight of a life built on lies. Slowly, he lifted his head and met his mother's eyes. I understand, he said quietly. I think I understand everything now. Delilah had returned, not in the flesh, but in the form of the truth, carried in the memories of the plantation's oldest slaves, in the whispers that had never been silenced, and in the unyielding moral reckoning that Catherine could no longer escape. One by one, the servants nodded. Some wept, some stared silently, the injustice of years evident in their eyes. The knowledge that one of their own had been forced into this deception, exploited and discarded, had remained buried too long. Catherine sank to her knees, tears streaming freely. I am sorry, she said, over and over. I am so very sorry. In the following days, word spread through Charleston of the Rutledge confession. Society matrons were shocked. Journalists arrived from the city, eager to record the details of the scandal that had unfolded quietly for more than a decade. The story of the boy raised as a legitimate heir, the deception, and the moral corruption of one of the most prominent families in the Low Country became the talk of the city. Yet in the midst of public scandal, a quieter justice emerged. William, now fully aware of his origins, approached Delilah's surviving family. He offered what support he could: land, education, protection. He promised to honor the life that had been denied to the woman who had given him life. Catherine, broken by the weight of her guilt and the collapse of the world she had controlled, withdrew from society entirely. She lived out her remaining years on the plantation, never again venturing into Charleston, haunted by the consequences of her ambition and deception. Samuel remained by her side, loyal but solemn, witnessing the slow unraveling of a legacy built on lies. He had grown up in the shadow of this deception, and the revelation left a scar that could never fully heal. And William, who had survived the storm of his own family's secrets, emerged with a rare clarity. He vowed to live differently, to acknowledge the past, to learn from it, and to ensure that the mistakes of those before him would not define the future. The Rutledge plantation, once a monument to wealth, power, and deception, became a symbol of reckoning, a place where the truth, long buried beneath layers of fear and social expectation, finally rose to the surface. Catherine's story, the secret of Delilah, and the boy who had unknowingly carried the weight of it all, became legend. It was told in whispers among the fields, in lessons from parents to children, and eventually, in history books as a cautionary tale about power, ambition, and the terrible cost of lies. The river, which had borne witness to so much, continued its quiet flow. The trees swayed in the wind. And somewhere, if one listened carefully, the faint echo of a lullaby could still be heard, a reminder of the past, the pain, and the truth that could never be hidden again. Call to action. If you were captivated by this story, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another dark historical mystery. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if you were in William's shoes? Don't forget to share this story with friends who love tales of hidden truths and secrets from history.